So, welcome to the podcast, Annie. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you for inviting me, Cleanne.
You're very welcome. So, Annie, tell us a little bit about you and what was the driving force of you becoming an author, a television sportcaster, and a teacher. And
Well,
what
you
is
know
that?
how you make plans in life
Mhm,
and they don't always go the way you intended.
mhm,
Um, I had a lot of forks in the road. I wanted to be a sportscaster when I was in high school, and I'm 70 years old. So that was in the 70s, and women were not sportscasters then. So everybody I met told me there's no way I would ever be that thing. Whether it was my own family, my teachers, my college professors, they said, you can't be a sportscaster, you're a girl. Um, and when I got out of college, they were right. I couldn't get an interview anywhere. So, sort of accidentally, I fell into sports officiating.
mhm.
I was an ice skater growing up. I was an ice dancer. I had no talent and I was way too big, but I was an ice skater. And so anybody's ever played a sport, you get that I'm going to have a gold medal. I'm going to be in the Super Bowl, whatever those are, that thrill that you might be a good athlete. And I really liked that feeling, even though I wasn't one. And so I realized I didn't know enough about sports. I really didn't because I was before Title IX when girls didn't have all that many opportunities.
Mhm.
And I went to a hockey game one night, a Washington Capitals game, and my aunt was with a friend who was an amateur hockey official, and he was bemoaning the fact that there weren't enough officials. And my aunt went, "Oh, Annie skates. Would you want to be a referee?" And I'm like, "Okay, I'll be a referee." I knew nothing about it, but I knew hockey because I grew up in a rink. And I signed up and took the test and went and officiated little tiny kids. Have you ever seen the little tiny hockey players with their little their helmets are too big and their jerseys are at their ankles? And I officiated that game that morning. And I don't remember much about it, except on the way home, I had an epiphany that I didn't know enough about sports. And if I wanted to learn about them, they weren't going to let me play.
Mhm.
So I decided to become a sports official in the five main team spectator sports: football, baseball, ice hockey, soccer, and basketball.
Mhm.
And I was going to do that for 5 years. And I figured some forward-thinking news director would go, "Oh, she must know what she's talking about," and that they'd give me a job. And that's exactly what happened. I
Wow.
ended up working for 5 TV stations, including ESPN, where I anchored SportsCenter for a bit.
Mhm.
And I never quit officiating until 2019, called my last football game. So I ended up officiating for 40 years, which
Wow.
is really strange. But you ask about my curve into teaching.
Mhm.
When I was pushing 40, I wasn't pretty enough to be on camera anymore. And yes, people think that that's not a thing, but it certainly was then, and it's not as bad now. But, the target audience for sports television are 18 to 34-year-old males. So once you're 35 or older, they're like, you're not hot enough to be on TV anymore. Now, that devastated me. I was crushed and I couldn't get a job. I mean, I ended up working for the NBA's Phoenix Suns for a couple of years, but then I was done. Nobody would hire me in the country. And it's hard looking in the mirror, going, well, if I had plastic surgery, maybe I'd get a job, right? But I couldn't do it. So I was going through a bad divorce and I was in debt and I couldn't didn't have a job. And so I did a lot of feeling sorry for me for quite a while. I look back and realize I wasted a lot of time. But a lot of people kept saying, you should be a teacher. You've been officiating all these years and you've been working with kids. You should be a teacher. I'm like, I don't want to be a teacher. I have no desire to be a teacher. I'm going to get back in TV. And of course, that didn't happen. And I ended up going back to college at 42 to be a teacher. And I got hired the whole time thinking this would be a temporary thing. And I got hired in a Title I school, which is where most of the kids live in poverty. And I was an average middle class kid whose parents paid for college, and I had never been in that kind of community.
Mhm.
And I ended up teaching at that school for 20 years.
Wow. So,
And
so Annie, you kind of opened the door for women in the sports, being a sportscaster. Were you one of the first that
yes,
did
yeah,
that?
yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I was one of the first at ESPN. There were a couple women before me, but in every market I worked, I was the only woman. I was the first woman. Now, that doesn't mean there were some women sports writers around the country, but there were hardly any of us back then. I mean, I was at ESPN 1990 to 1992.
Mm.
So I was always the only woman covering in the press box. For the most part, I was the only woman in the geez, in the locker room, which is a horrible place to be. But that was my job. And I was very fortunate that mostly men were nice to me. Mostly players were nice to me, but some were not. Some felt like, I didn't belong there, and there was some negativity. But I like to remember the guys that were good to me. My first two TV stations, I took the top spot, the sports director job for men who were already at the stations, and they both were kind to me. They didn't hold it against me, and they taught me how to be a sportscaster. Because quite honestly, I didn't know how to be a sportscaster. I knew how to be a referee and an umpire. And I worked in a bar in Georgetown in Washington, D.C. all that time. And so I could make you a great cocktail, but I didn't know how to be a sportscaster. So those two men helped me immensely. And there were a lot of good guys. Sadly, some of them were sabotaged me and did cruel things. And I try not to think about that, but it's a reality. And I know I taught briefly at Arizona State University sports reporting, and there were two little girls in my class, and they were so shocked
Mhm.
that, oh, people weren't nice to you. The funny thing to me was that they said, when you went to different TV stations, did they make you wear different clothes and did they make you do your hair differently? I'm like, of course they did. It's a visual medium. And they were very angry with me or upset that I gave in. I'm like, they signed my paycheck. They want me to wear my hair one way. They don't like my earrings or my clothes. They buy me new ones and I wear them. And they were upset. Like I sold out sometimes. I'm like, ladies, this is what it is. And so it's so funny now you see women everywhere, but they're still not getting the good jobs.
Mhm.
You see women in football and they're sideline reporters. That's a stupid job. It's the dumbest job in sports reporting. Do I want to hold a microphone in a coach's face who's down 30 points at halftime? I don't. It's so they're still not letting women do play-by-play in the booth or color or, they still have the kind of mindless jobs. They're not the ones answering the sports questions. They're the ones asking them. So I don't know that it's gotten any better. I don't really think it does. The good news is I don't miss it at all.
So why do you think it's like that? Do you think because maybe men feel that women don't probably don't know the sports too much because they're
Yes.
paid or okay, okay.
Well, that's part of it. For example, it's the same as officiating. I mean, I was always the only woman on the football field, the baseball field. Those were my favorite sports to officiate. And my bosses would say, "Oh, it's unfortunate that you don't officiate women's sports like basketball and softball." They said you might get somewhere. I'm like, but I like football and baseball. And they always, there were men that wouldn't work with me, didn't feel I belonged there. So it was like that in the newsroom. I think part of it was they think it's brain surgery. Okay, I know rules. I know
Mhm.
rules. I know how the games run. I was a referee. Are you a football fan at all?
Kind of, not really. A little
Well,
bit.
this is a test. How many referees are on a football field?
Oh man, I think there's 12. No.
Well, it's a trick question because
Okay.
there's only one. It's the
Oh,
one with the white hat, the one that says I have holding 76 offense, right? So I got thrown off crews for 14 years because guys would say, we're never going to get the big games with you because you're a woman. We're
oh,
never getting state championship. And they were right. So I stood up in a meeting of 400 officials and said, I'm going to start a crew. I'm going to be the referee and crew chief. If you want to work with me, meet me in the corner, right? Because then they'd know they were never going to get the big games. And so I took charge. I was the referee and crew chief. And
mhm.
I mention that because I know the games very well. Today I could still be reporting if anybody give me a job, but
Mhm.
they still feel uncomfortable with it. They pretend it's okay for women, but if you watch, the women are very beautiful for the most part, and they ask all the questions. No one ever asks a woman, why is this team losing? What's your opinion on what's going on in the field? So I don't think it's gotten better, which makes no sense.
Yeah. So Annie, which of those skills or which of those careers that you've had, which of them you feel has moved you in the right direction?
It's an interesting question. When I was a teacher, again, I didn't think I'd stay a teacher. And again, I was in a community where my kids lived in poverty. We had kids that were neglected, abused, homeless, foster care, all those kinds of things I'd never run into. I had kids who were hungry,
Mhm.
right? So I wasn't very nice. I was a hard ass at first. I didn't understand that you have to understand the children. You have to understand what they're going through because if a kid is hungry, homework doesn't matter.
You can't
Or
learn it through.
if a kid slept under the stadium stairs because he's homeless, then school doesn't matter.
Mm-mm.
So I took me a while to understand that I needed to get to know every one of my kids so that I could help them in any way I could. And my school was great, honestly. We were in a bad part of town, but we had a pantry where there were clothes and toiletries and shoes, and any kid could go in at any time and take what they needed. We sent food home. We served breakfast and lunch. And so I went from being kind of a spoiled brat, complaining about, oh, poor me, I'm not in TV anymore, to dealing with these kids.
Mhm.
And I couldn't have any children of my own, and that bothered me for a long time. And then at the end of the school year, I got in the habit of putting my phone number on the board because I worried for 10 weeks these kids have no structure, they might not have food, and so I would worry. And I said, don't ever give them your number, but I did. I put it on the board and I said, if you get in trouble and don't know what to do, you call me and I'll try to help you. And I got a call from a young man one summer, just
Mhm.
wanted to chat. I didn't know something was wrong. He wouldn't tell me. And he was in foster care.
Mhm.
And he was supposed to be in my class that year. I said, I'm going to see you soon. You're going to be in my class. Kids could take my class repeatedly because I taught journalism. And
Mhm.
he didn't show up. A couple weeks went by. His number was disconnected. And I finally, he called me. And I was alone in my classroom at the time. I didn't have a cell phone, so that was a little weird. He called me in my classroom. And he said, Miss Montgomery, I'm hungry. I said, what do you mean you're hungry? He said, they lock up the food in the morning. I'm in a group home, and then my new school doesn't have my paperwork, so they don't feed me lunch. And I don't know what to do. And I was horrified. And I said, can I reach you this number? He said, yes. I hung up and I started swearing. There were no children around. Another teacher comes in. She goes, what is the matter? And I told her. And she said, oh, if it bothers you so much, call foster care and say he can come and live with you.
Mhm.
I said, I'm 55 years old. I've never had any children. I don't know how to be a mother.
Mhm.
But I did call foster care. And 2 weeks later, he was delivered to my doorstep. And
Um,
I went to foster bomb school for 10 weeks.
mhm.
I'd like to tell you it was easy. It was not.
Mhm.
The kids have all kind of problems, and people say love is enough. Love is not enough. You need psychiatrists, you need health care, you need all sorts of things. Bottom line is today I have 4 kids.
Oh,
Um, Actually, 5. There's a fifth, but he came in as an adult.
okay.
Um, they were all 5 of them were my students at some point.
Mhm.
I'm very proud of all of them because they could have been in the streets. If your kids in foster care, 50% end up homeless almost immediately. 25% end up in the sex industry.
Mhm.
So all of them have been to some college, 2 have graduated from college.
Mhm.
And I have a grandson
Oh,
who's
nice.
8. Adrian's 8. So I get called mom. And if I hadn't been forced out of TV and I hadn't become a teacher, I wouldn't be a mom.
I was just about to say that.
I
Like,
wouldn't be. So I'm like so grateful they threw me out of TV because it's something I didn't ever expect would happen. And granted, I got them all as teenagers, which wasn't easy. I have 3 boys and a girl, 4 boys, well, 3 boys and a girl. Again, the one came to me years later, and he's 30, but he lives at my house still. 2 of them do, but they pay rent, because they have to be responsible. They have jobs, and yeah. So all I can say is that life throws you curveballs,
Mhm.
or the road forks. You take it, go a direction, and it's astonishing what might happen. And
Mhm.
for me, it was I'm a mom and I'm a grandma.
Nice. So, Annie, I know you're also an author. Tell us about your books and what's the genre and what's your latest publication?
My agent hated me before she retired because write in many genres.
Mhm.
Mostly I write about things that interest me because I spent so many years in a newsroom. I'm a news junkie. I read the paper every day. I watch the news and I hear stories that interest me that I find exciting. And and I also write about societal issues, and much of that probably came from teaching where I did. I ran a support group for a while of kids, again, with all sorts of issues. And so I wrote The Scent of Rain, which is about a 16-year-old girl in a religious cult.
Hmm.
which is a real cult in Arizona where I live. And I wrote a book called Wild Horses on the Salt, which is about a woman escaping domestic violence. And she flees New Jersey and comes to Arizona. They're almost all based in Arizona.
Okay.
But I do have a World War II historical fiction inspired by a man who was in the Grace Registration Service during World War II. He was at Normandy, Battle of the Bulge. He was with Patton in Czechoslovakia, and his job was to collect, identify, and bury the dead.
Mm.
And no one ever talks about them. And he didn't come home. He's a real guy. His niece asked me to write a novel about him, and I wrote that. That's called Your Forgotten Sons.
Mhm.
Most recently, I have two books republished, which
Mhm.
is like having new books. A number of years ago, I got COVID, passed out, broke my leg, took 8 months to walk again,
Mhm.
and the books got published, and I got no did no public relations. But one is called The Castle,
Mhm.
and it's about a serial rapist in a national park, which
Mhm.
sounds really horrible, but it's a helpful book. I was sexually assaulted in college, and so I'm one of the Me Too people. And it's about a woman and how her strengths and friends and how she makes it through what
Mhm.
happened to her. And then there's Wolfcatcher, which is about a man who was buried 900 years ago outside of Flagstaff, Arizona. That's true. He was in this fabulous tomb, 600 beautiful funerary objects.
Mhm.
And I was hired by a magazine to find out who he was
Mhm.
because he didn't look like the people who buried him 900 years ago. He was different. He was very tall and he just didn't look like the Native Americans there.
Mhm.
So I was stupid and went to the Hopi tribe and tried to find out who he was. I got in some trouble for because I was didn't understand the Native American world. I do now.
Mhm.
And I wrote about who he might have been from the reporter's view, looking for, trying to research who he might have been, and that goes back 900 years ago to what it was like in the high desert in Arizona then. So all sorts of different
Yeah,
topics.
which is really
Um,
nice. Yeah. So
yeah.
they're all fiction or non? They're fiction.
Um, there's a lot of truth in them.
Okay.
Because I was a reporter, I'm very specific about getting things
Hmm.
correctly. Um, but the characters are fictitious. But
Hmm.
when I talk about facts, I mean they're true.
Okay.
So that my first published book is called A Light in the Desert. It was about a train derailment in Arizona in 1995.
Hmm.
Domestic terrorism remains an unsolved crime, and it was deadly. And I went out there and researched it just like I would if I was a reporter.
Hmm.
And all the facts about the wreck are true. So I write fiction around truth, I guess is the best way to put it. Different genres too. I mean, I have historical fiction, thriller, romance, young adult fiction. It just depends on what's moving me at the time.
Okay. So Anna, where can the listeners get a copy of your book? And where can they get in touch with you? And what's your socials?
All they have to do is go to my website. It's AnnMontgomeryWriter.com, Ann with an E. So AnnMontgomeryWriter.com. All my social media's there. All my links, everything are right there. So that's the best way to do it.
Right. So, Anne, do you have any last words for the listeners on how to cope with stress, especially someone who has multiple careers and multiple skills, and someone who just wants to do what you have done?
I think we have to be more open-minded to change. We make plans in our lives. I'm going to do this. My kids are going to do that. We have a plan. Plans rarely work forever. And it's like when I had students who would say, I want to be a football player. I'm going to be a professional football player. I'm like, that's great. But the average career is like 3.5 years. So what are you going to do when you're 26 and you're not a football player anymore? So I think we have to plan and understand our lives are going to change. So for me, that means be curious about lots of things. I know today I can't do a lot of the things I used to do because I'm old and broken. Remember when they told us sports were good for us? They lied.
Mhm.
So everything's been MRI'd or X-rayed. So I can't officiate anymore. I can't ice skate anymore. I don't ski anymore. So you have to have things to replace the things that move on or you can't do anymore. So I think we need more curiosity. I'm delighted that I'm curious still all the time. So I think be willing to accept change because it's sometimes good for us and be curious. Always be curious to find new things that excite you.
Sounds good. So, Anne, it was wonderful having you on Beauty of Colors podcast.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And I thank you for letting me tell my story.